Hello, everybody. Welcome to this evening presentation. I'm Paola Dazzan. I'm a professor of neurobiology and psychosis at the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience at King's College London, which is in a much less attractive part of London compared to here. So I'm delighted to welcome you here. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this King's Festival of Artificial Intelligence 2025. The festival has been organized by the King's Institute for Artificial Intelligence. And this is the third year that it has brought a wide array of free events to both King's but also external audiences to showcase the range of AI expertise that is present across King's. This year, there are over 40 separate events happening over 5 days between the 20th and 24th of May. If you would like to find out more about the festival and the King Institute for AI, join our mailing list to find out about other events in the festival, and you can go to www.kcl.ac.uk/AI or follow the King's Institute on social media. Now, I have to give you some housekeeping recommendations. Please switch your mobile phones to silent. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, since we are lucky to have Paris here in person. And if the fire alarm sounds, you will have to get out. We will have to get out because there is no test planned. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker. I'm very lucky to be here introducing Paris Lalousis as our speaker for the next hour. Paris is a lecturer in artificial intelligence and mental health at the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience, where I also work at King's. He leads the Artificial Intelligence in Mental Health AIM lab, where he uses state-of-the-art artificial intelligence methods to improve understanding of disease processes in mental illness. He focuses on the translation of data science into clinical care in mental health disorders. We're very lucky that Paris moved from Birmingham down to the IUP in South London 2 years ago, and that we are collaborating with him even more closely. So I will leave you with him for a very interesting presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Paola, for the very kind introduction. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm very pleased with the attendance at 6 p.m. On a on a Wednesday. Yeah, really pleased, and I hope I do yourselves. You're happy with what you're going to listen to today. So the title for today is AI and Me: A Personal Journey to Revolutionizing Mental Health. Just a disclaimer, I've not revolutionized mental health yet, but I'll show you some of the work that I'm doing to try and improve mental health outcomes and predictions. But also I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal experiences. So this is a bit of a hybrid version of a talk that I've done in other events. So I'm going to talk about some personal experiences with mental health that I have had and have. And then I'm going to link it to the work that I do and how those experiences have informed the decisions that I make in the research practices that I undertake with my team at the IOPPN. Sorry, this keeps going on without me telling it to do that, so it just... Yeah? Okay, yeah. I think it's it has an automatic... Yeah, thank you. So, thankfully for the first 5 or so minutes, there's no slides needed, so I'm going to talk about my personal experiences with mental health. Which started at the age of 6. And the way it started is that I used to go, it usually happened when I used to go to friends' birthday parties. And I would feel very uneasy. I would feel very unhappy. The way I would express it when I was 6 years old is that I felt dizzy, and I always would call my mum or my dad to come get me and take me from those birthday parties away so that I can feel calm again. This would go on for a few years. It started manifesting in other aspects as well. It started happening in the classroom. It started happening where a lot of people were around. Yes, thank you very much, Paula. At that age, also just to preface this, so I'm part Greek. I was born and raised in Greece. All of these things happened in early 90s Greece, where mental health literacy was not very high. So I had those experiences, and I'd go to we go to different doctors to try and identify what's happening, why I'm not happy in these situations, unsuccessfully. I remember like one GP said, oh, maybe his energy levels are not very good. They prescribed me some vitamins to take, and obviously that didn't help at all. That would happen throughout my childhood and my early adolescence, when at the age of 14, I also, because of these experiences, so it started becoming more and more severe. I also developed depression, so I had a major depressive disorder episode, which meant that I had to drop out of school, out of secondary school for a year. Yeah, not sure what that is. It was at that point that also at that age I started becoming being able to articulate what I'm feeling even better, and it's at that point that I first came under psychiatric care. And it was a liberating moment for me to receive a diagnosis where, the psychiatrist said the experiences you've had was, panic disorder, and you've got MDD and agoraphobia. And even though that was a very good moment for me to receive a diagnosis and perhaps see some light at the end of the tunnel, I still had to go through a lot of different trials with different antidepressants, different dosages, and a lot of trial and error until I found what was the best way for me to be able to function in a social setting and in general have a life that could be fulfilling. And this trial and error happened throughout my teenage years, so between the ages of 14 and 18. There's more to this story, but hopefully a good preface that will give you an understanding of some of the work that I'm doing with AI in different mental health disorders, and why I think artificial intelligence and machine learning have a place in this field. So thinking about artificial intelligence, probably most people here, when I say artificial intelligence, will think of ChatGPT. But it's a much broader field than just that. So the Merriam-Webster dictionary has a definition of artificial intelligence as a branch of computer science dealing with the simulation of intelligent behavior in computers, and a second definition as the capability of a machine to imitate intelligent human behavior. And ChatGPT and generative AI is part of that. But there's also the prediction side of things, where we try to predict outcomes before they take place, so trying to predict future outcomes. There's also clustering, so trying to identify homogeneous groups of people or biological data through the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms. So you'll hear me talk about AI and machine learning interchangeably today. This is a good graph that showcases the overlap between all of them. So if you think of artificial intelligence as an overall umbrella that encompasses the field, and then you have machine learning, which is the ability of computers to learn specific patterns without being explicitly programmed to do so, and then you have deep learning, which is a more advanced way of understanding patterns, a type of learning that mimics the way that the human brain learns with different neurons and input and output variables. So why is AI needed in mental health research and care? This is a picture from, well, depicting Plato's allegory of the cave. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the allegory, but Plato was suggesting that, you know, there's these people in a cave who have some shackles, and they view this as the real life, when in reality the events that take place here are not actually real life, but rather a representation of things that are happening behind their back, and they can see them through the shadows that are created by the light. So why am I talking about Plato and this in this AI talk? The reason is because I believe we are experiencing something similar with mental illness, and especially when it comes to biology. So we have certain diagnoses, depression, panic disorder, schizophrenia, that we allocate people to, but the underlying biology is not entirely reflected in those diagnostic labels that we have. So, for example, I might have a diagnosis of depression, and somebody else might have a diagnosis of depression, but the biological pathways through which we arrive to this same diagnosis might be completely different. Yet we will both be treated with the same medication, with the same psychological therapies, and we will go through the same care pathways in the health system. And conversely, somebody might have a diagnosis of depression, and I might have a diagnosis of psychosis. And even though we have two very different diagnostic labels, the biological underpinnings through which we arrive to this diagnosis might be very similar, but we will be treated with different medications, and we'll go to different pathways in the healthcare system. And I believe AI has some power to help us disentangle this mismatch between diagnostic labels and underlying biology, and kind of break the shackles in Plato's cave to do that. In healthcare in general, the use of mathematics and regressions is not a new thing. So in the 50s, we had this algorithm where people would estimate adequate ventilation for people who suffered with polio in the 50s. So it's a very simple mathematical model where you would take the weight of a patient, the gender of the patient, some other variables such as if they're I can't see now, can't remember. So yeah, if they're how active they are, how physically active they are, and certain other variables, and you're able to estimate the amount of ventilation they would need for polio. Similarly, we have cardiovascular disease risk scores, which are being calculated with certain equations of age, gender, and certain risk factors, and then that will produce a profile for people that can personalize their care in the health system. Unfortunately, we don't have that in mental health, and I'm going to talk about my research today, so give you a bit of understanding of the work that I do and how I've used AI to address the issues that as I see them. And I'm going to focus a lot on the biological aspects, and I'm not saying that it's just biology, because of the interest that I have also from my personal experiences, and we can touch upon that later. Depression and psychosis have they're two diagnostic labels that, as I said, have no reflection to underlying biology. And they have a lot of overlapping symptoms and a lot of overlapping neurobiological mechanisms. So in terms of brain structure, people with depression and psychosis will show similar gray matter volume abnormalities in similar areas of the brain. In terms of their inflammation, they will show similar cytokines that are elevated. And this lack of biomedical understanding of the disorders has led to a lack of biomedical translation in psychiatry, with detrimental effects to disease and treatment course prediction. So what I wanted to look with the work that I've done in the study that I'm going to present is kind of ignore the diagnostic label that these patients, the data of which I used. So ignore whether they have depression or psychosis and just use biological data to try and identify similar groups of patients. Essentially the question that I had, so as I mentioned before, AI also includes clustering. I wanted to see if I can identify clusters of similarity based on neuroanatomical data, so brain scans. So I had 300 people with depression and psychosis, and we had the brain scans, and we wanted to use AI to try and identify these homogeneous groups. I'm not going to go into too much detail if this is a scary slide, but the method that I used is called semi-supervised machine learning. And essentially what it does is, if you think of the red dots here as patients and the blue dots here as healthy controls, it tries to identify the subgrouping that's the most stable, which ensures that the patients are different from each other, but also each patient subgroup is different from the healthy controls. And it does that in an iterative fashion. So it will test whether 2 clusters are the most stable solution, whether 3 clusters are the most stable solution, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It does that iteratively, and then we have a metric that measures how stable that solution is. So I applied this machine learning, semi-supervised machine learning algorithm to data from patients with depression and psychosis. The algorithm didn't know who had depression and who had psychosis. It was just the brain scans. And I wanted to see whether the algorithm will put all the people with the psychosis in one group and all the people with depression in another group, or would they be what we term transdiagnostic? So do they have similar neurobiological picture? And what the algorithm identified was 2 clusters that are completely transdiagnostic. So when we tested whether there was a significant effect of diagnosis in the clusters that we identified, there was none. So it was, I think, 150 people in one cluster and 150 in the other cluster, and it was 80 people with depression and 70 people with psychosis in both clusters. And then when we went back to look at the brain structure of the clusters of the patients in the clusters that we identified, we saw this picture, which shows the areas of the brain that the people who belonged into one cluster had gray matter volume reduction. So the volume of the gray matter was reduced. And the colors here represent what areas these reductions were in, and the higher the lighter the color, so the more yellow the color, the more pronounced this gray matter volume reduction was. And this was an interesting picture for me because I'd usually, based on the research that I've done, I would usually associate this picture with more of a chronic schizophrenia sample. But these people were people who had not just psychosis, there were some people who had depression, which is usually thought of as a less biological, it has a less biological signature. And also something else that I forgot to mention was that these people were within the first 3 months of presentation of their illness. We also saw that certain cytokines, so this is a measurement of inflammation that we take from the blood. We saw that they were elevated for a certain, the group that also showed this gray matter volume reductions across the brain. Now, the interesting thing, the even more interesting thing that we did was because we had data from these patients from baseline, so when they first came to us, and then we also had the data from 9 months after they came to us. We were able to see who performed better, who performed worse, who had a better outcome, who had a poorer outcome, who had more symptoms, who had less symptoms at that 9-month time point. And we developed AI algorithms to try and predict that using certain variables such as the blood biomarkers and also some questionnaires. And I wanted to test if, when I do this prediction within the traditional diagnosis of psychosis versus depression, compared to this new separation that I identified from these two clusters, if that outperformed the traditional diagnosis. So this is a busy slide, but what I wanted to focus on, what I wanted to focus on is the balanced accuracy. So this is how accurate the algorithm was at predicting the outcome at 9 months. So in the psychosis and depression framework, we had accuracies around 50% up to 56%. And then, at least for one of the clusters that we had, we were able to predict outcomes with roughly 70% accuracy. And this was a statistically significant effect. So it showed us that when we identify the heterogeneity at the neurobiological level of patients with depression and psychosis, and we look at these biological frameworks, and then try to predict outcomes from that framework compared to the current diagnostic framework that we have, we can be more accurate at identifying people in terms of their treatment response, their symptomatological remission, and a host of other measures. So in this study, I'm hopefully showed you that AI can be useful in mental health, and specifically in depression and psychosis, because we identified for the first time 2 transdiagnostic clusters that were based on completely neurobiological data. And we termed the 2 clusters, one of them we termed it the impaired phenotype, the other one we termed it the preserved phenotype because of this gray matter volume reductions that we saw across the brain. And we showed that we could predict outcomes in this new biologically based and biologically informed classification framework compared to the traditional diagnoses that we have. And this is some of the work that I've done, but there's also a lot of work that is currently being done in my lab at the IOPPN, and I wanted to showcase some of the great work that people are doing. So Dr. Fiona Coutts is working on a very key problem around AI prediction models, which is whether they generalize in different samples. So you might be developing something in a UK sample, but then when you try and apply that model in maybe a North African sample or a Southeast Asian sample, the AI models may not translate very well because the algorithm might have learned some underlying structures, maybe it's picked up on ethnicity or certain other stuff. So Fiona is working on creating essentially a benchmarking tool for prediction tools in psychiatry that will have to meet those benchmarks in order to be proven successful. She's also very interested in trying and predicting side effects. So she's working a lot on side effects prediction, especially in psychosis. So when somebody uses antipsychotics, can we predict what kind of side effects, if they will develop side effects? So helping inform patient choice by the use of AI algorithms. Sergio works on trying to predict depression symptoms and depression episodes within psychosis. So if somebody has a psychosis diagnosis, can we predict whether they will develop a comorbid depression diagnosis at a later stage? And if we can do that, can we intervene at an early phase to prevent that? Dr. Grace Jacobs, who's sitting right there, is working on some very interesting work looking at the overlap between depression and psychosis, but incorporate longitudinal information. So as I said, in the study that we have baseline information, we have 9-month information, and we have 18-month information. And she's using a method that's called dynamic time warping, which tries to identify how different symptoms across different diagnoses coalesce together over a long time. And my PhD students also are doing incredible work. Linda Bryant is working on trying to classify and create a clinical progression model for Parkinson's disease. And has got some very fascinating results that I'm sure are going to be published within the next few months. Louise is also working on the overlap between depression and psychosis, trying to further disentangle the biological heterogeneity that is present in psychosis and depression with AI and further neurobiological measures. And Nicoletta Serbu, Nikki, is working further on this. So as I mentioned, the elevated inflammation that is from blood samples that we are identifying in schizophrenia. She's trying to link that to another disease that is called NMDR encephalitis and identify the overlaps and points of rarity between the two. So lots of cool work that we're doing in the lab, I think. But I wanted to give a shout out to the guys. So to conclude and to take it back also a bit back to my personal journey, I hope I've, with this small example, showcased that AI has the potential to transform mental health research and clinical outcomes. Early identification is really important personally to me. From the age of 6 till the age of 14, for 8 years, I was undiagnosed. I always think, you know, how can I help people that might be in a similar situation now in any mental health disorder? Are we able to create tools that are going to diagnose people faster and more accurately? I hope I showed you that current psychiatric disorders and diagnoses rely on symptom-based groupings rather than underlying biology. And I think with understanding the biology between these between different disorders can help us arrive at more biologically driven predictions and treatments. And that's also borne out from some personal experiences that I've had, like I said, with trial and error. So can we identify what medication is going to be best for which person, at which time, and at what dosage, rather than having the trial and error that's currently happening with people. And I suppose if you leave this with one takeaway message, is that even though stratified medicine in psychiatry remains underdeveloped, machine learning models and artificial intelligence can help. And it's already happening in the research side, and we're hoping to translate that in a clinical setting by applying for funding for trials. It can help tailor treatments and identify clinical profiles early. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for being here at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday. Thank you very much to my team, who works very hard on a daily basis to solve problems in mental health. Thank you very much to the participants who had whose data I used in all the analyses that I presented, and also all my collaborators and friends. And I think Paula is going to come up now and perhaps give some comments and maybe any questions that you have. I'm very happy to answer from whichever part of my talk you want to further hear about.
Thank you, Paris. This has been really inspirational. It's fantastic to hear you talking so openly about your mental health challenges and about how those have really inspired what you're doing now. It's something that I'm a psychiatrist, so I know very well how important it is that, like Paris said, we really talk about these experiences because they are all part of our life, to various extent. And it's just by talking about it and doing more research on this that we can really move forward. So thank you very much. It was truly inspirational.
Thanks.
And we have time for a few questions from you guys. I know I have a lot of questions, but yeah, first question here.
I think we need the mic.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you. My name is Chamaka. I have my quick question. How wide did you go with the data that you used? Was it just focused on the UK because you talked about trying to help anyone with any form of mental health? There are countries where it's still such a stigma that it's not even talked about and people with mental health sort of vanish. I have a personal story where, a friend who was a roommate just suddenly, very brilliant, first class, suddenly disappeared. Mm. And 20 years later, everyone was like, where is she? I recently found out she had some sort of mental breakdown and her family just hid that and hid her away. So what steps are being taken, if any, for, people outside the UK?
Yes, thank you. So the data that I presented was from an EU-wide study. So it was not just the UK, but it was still European-centric. So it was from the UK, Germany, Italy, Finland, and I forget the other side. So we are already working to try and have different data sets from different countries to make sure that the prediction models that we create are really applicable to different ethnicities, different countries. Some of the work that my postdoc Fiona is doing is addressing exactly that. So ensuring that the AI models that we develop are capturing signatures that are not related just to white people or just to black people, but it's across different ethnicities. And we do that by applying models that we develop to other countries, and then also developing models with data from other countries and then applying them to our own data. And also, you know, if anybody is working on this kind of stuff, we also do something that's called sensitivity analysis. So we take the data that we have and we see if we remove a predominant ethnicity from our models, is that related to the accuracy that our prediction models have? And through those mechanisms, we can try and create these tools that can be applicable across different countries, across different ethnicities and cultures. Thank you.
Thank you. One question up there.
And then there's...
yeah, there is one here, and then Louise. I would add in the meantime, while you are going up the stairs, that it's also very difficult to have large MRI data sets from certain countries, which obviously limits the reproducibility of the kind of work you're doing in other countries.
Yes.
Yes, my name is Serge. I'm a lecturer at London Metropolitan University. Thank you for your lovely presentation. Question, let's see. You had that slide on the results. How do you distinguish if it's, for example, if the results demonstrate high levels of depression, schizophrenia? How do you keep it consistent, or do you determine that through the AI, or just through the like other extra cognitive skills or cognitive experimenting?
Yeah, thank you. So the AI came in trying to identify the subgroups. So I want to see if there was going to be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 subgroups, and whether they would be completely transdiagnostic, or it would be one group that had schizophrenia and one group that had depression. Once we established that there was this stable 2-cluster solution, we then went post hoc and did some statistical tests between the 2 clusters. So we then went back, even though the algorithm didn't know the diagnostic labels, we then went back and checked how many diagnoses of schizophrenia are within one cluster, how many within another cluster, how many of depression within one cluster, how many of depression within another cluster. And then we also compared their symptoms using univariate statistics.
Okay, another question there, and then here, and then Louise, and then another one there. I'm not going to keep track of all this, so please, remember which point you were in the queue.
Hi, I have a 2-part question. The first part, first of all, I would like to say it's amazing to see how useful AI is in your field and how much it makes an impact. But coming at it from a technical perspective, I would like to know if there has been any negative diagnosis, or in a way you think they have something and the machine model has misdiagnosed it. Has there been any cases of error?
And of error and of negative what?
So for example, you take my brain scan, my blood test, and you think I'm going to get psychosis, which I hope I don't get. But if you think I do, and I end up in real life not getting it, so that's like a misdiagnosis or a misprediction. Has there been any such instances of misprediction?
Well, yeah, so every AI model will have its correct classifications and also its misclassifications. So when it doesn't pick up something that it could, or it picks something that's not there. So the way to, so these are research findings. So these have not been, is AI that has been applied in data that has already been collected. What we're now doing with certain trials that we are taking part in is trying to see if we compare, one stream where clinicians have an AI recommender system next to them, and one stream of clinicians that doesn't have that, then does that give an added benefit? Will they predict? Because clinicians all predict most of the time, right? So
They try.
Yeah, you try and predict. So you get somebody with clinical high risk for psychosis, you want to know if they will have psychosis or not. So there's a couple of active trials that are currently happening in mental health where we're trying to see if having this AI component results in more people being accurately detected. And from those results, we will see if also the opposite happens, where maybe somebody has been wrongly classified. But they're recommender systems. At the end of the day, it's the clinicians that will have the final say into what treatment will happen and which pathway people will go. I compare it to what brain scans were in the MRI was in the 70s and the 80s, where urologists would have to make the diagnosis without them, and then you have your MRIs and they can use them as a guide. That's how I envision AI to be used for clinicians. And I don't know if you want to add something.
No, I think that's exactly right. I don't think we are there yet, but this is the direction in which we're going. And like Paris said, it's, it will be a great day when we can obviously use the MRI. I think at the moment, the kind of studies that we are doing in this area are not sort of immediately applicable yet in terms of a screening or a prediction, but we hope that they will be at some point.
The second part of my question, it might be a bit tricky. This is regarding autism and ADHD. So what I've read is autism and ADHD is now becoming more prominent among the UK next generation, so as to say. And I believe there was something in the news about some autisms related to the gut of the mum. So some autisms can be related to the gut health of the mother,
gut.
right? So this is me thinking aloud. Could AI help in diagnosing well in advance, based on genetic markers or anything, to predict if the child has a high degree of autism or ADHD, and probably early intervention and support?
Yeah. Well, my specialty is not in autism or ADHD, so I'm not able to really answer to that. But if there is a biomarker that can be identified that is related to autism pathogenesis, then yes, AI would be able to assist in that. But there needs to be a first step where a link between a biological measure and a diagnosis is established first before we get to the AI part.
Okay, next question.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for sharing. I think it's very brave of you, first of all, to share something so personal. And I'm in the wellbeing space as well as the tech space. So at the moment, we're building some wellbeing support systems. And I know specifically this research has been to help clinicians, but we're seeing more and more that people are turning to things like ChatGPT to talk to them about their problems anonymously or feeling like it's going to be anonymized. And, more tools kind of in and around trying to build well-being, 24-hour support, even not going to a clinician or having that kind of brave diagnosis of, okay, I'm feeling this way, I need to go and speak to someone. So would you consider your research being really important in potentially feeding into some of these tools that are growing and being the backbone with some hardcore evidence? And would you consider it? And what would you look out for if you were to consider it?
And what would I be?
Sorry, yeah, if you were to share your research with third-party platforms, companies that would be essentially building support systems for well-being and early prevention, etc., would you consider it? And what would you need to do for it to be all compliant and something that you'd consider?
Yeah, thanks a lot for your question. So in principle, yes, I'd be happy to share any early recognition AI algorithm that has been developed that can help with tailoring people into going into these AI-assisted tools that are being developed. My only concern is that because if you want to be classed as a medical device and you want to have a clinical impact, you have to go through a randomized control trial. And a lot of companies will not go down that route, and they will market themselves as a wellness app. And I just wouldn't feel as confident with something that hasn't undergone a rigorous...
Excuse me. No, it's here.
That hasn't undergone a randomized control trial. And I know there's a lot of discussion in the space currently from the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority. They're actually working on a regulation piece to make sure that the tools that are developed undergo stringent testing, but also we're not stifling innovation, because we also know that startups, want to get quickly to the money-making phase, and it's about striking that balance. I hope that answered your question. Hi, Louise. You got the mic.
No.
Green, the light green.
Okay, you can hear me now. Great, thank you so much, Paris. It was a great presentation, and I really enjoyed the combination between your personal experience and the research that you do. I tried to formulate my question so that it makes sense to me and to you as well. To me, it seems that there's something, there's a puzzle, I think, there's a piece in the puzzle that I cannot find, and it would be the symptoms. So I can understand that we want to improve the way that we help people and we make, kind of diagnosis and everything. And I can see that your model are based on biological data mostly. And I did wonder about whether we could put information in those models about the symptoms that people report, and whether, so that would be one of my questions. And the other one is whether the ultimate aim is for patients to go to see a psychiatrist or a GP. They take a blood test or they take a scan, and then they say, the GP will say, this is what you have, no need for a symptoms report.
Mm-hmm.
So where are the symptoms? Where is the voice of the patient saying how they feel and what they experience and all of that?
Yes. So to answer the first part of your question, whether we can include symptom level data in prediction models, yes, we can. And we actually have done in some of the work that I've not presented here, where we're actually combining different data modalities, so symptom level data, MRI data, blood data, and we try and incorporate all the different information that can lead to a prediction. And like I said previously, also the voice of the patient will always come at the end. This is a tool that can assist the clinician and then can also assist the patient into making a decision if that is a side effects prediction or a prediction of symptomatological outcome. They will always have the final say. In my mind, it will empower them because they will have even more information to make that choice. And then another comment on that about the symptoms, and why also I'm very interested in the biological aspects of things is, for example, in depression, one of the symptoms that you might be scored for depression is sleeping problems. But that can mean two things. You will be scored the same if you're oversleeping and the same if you're undersleeping. The same goes for appetite. You will be scored for overeating or undereating. And my guess is that a lot of the times we have a symptom and we think it's just that, and it has one biological correlate. But my gut feeling is that there's multiple ways through which you can arrive to a specific symptom, which is why I want to try and identify if there is any ground biological truth that cuts across different symptoms.
Can you pass it to the gentleman at the back? Got it. Yeah.
Me?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you for the presentations. I'll tell you a bit about myself. So I'm a data science student in University of Westminster. So it was very familiar to me. I have two questions about that. I want to emphasize about the validation part that you explained. So how you gonna validate? So like what will be the procedure that results you're getting from your models are pretty much similar or not similar from the primitive techniques like DSM-5 and all? And with continuation of that question, I want to know if results turns out to be that promising, how soon it can be applied in the clinical labs?
So the first question, if I understand correctly, is you asked about the validation of the models and what we did to validate the models. Yeah. So I didn't go into details about that, but for the the clustering solution that I presented within the same cohort of patients that we had, we also had a data set from a different cohort of patients, and then we applied that solution to see if it externally validates. And we also had 3 completely external data sets from 2 from the US and 1 from Germany, where we applied that model and it still held its accuracy. The second question, the harder question, when do I see these solutions being implemented in the healthcare system? I think it really depends. There's, like I mentioned earlier, there's currently trials that are ongoing to test whether AI recommender systems in mental health help clinical decision making. The second part of that will then go down the medical device route, where you would have to do a randomized controlled trial to prove that your solution is safe and it actually delivers the promise that it's that is making. I don't know. I think we'll see it in my lifetime. I'll say that. Whether that will be now or towards the end of my lifetime, I don't know.
That's a positive answer. Okay, great. Okay, one question here, and then we go back up to 2 gentlemen, I think.
Okay.
I can't keep track. There are too many. This is fantastic for a chair, you know, it's to be confused about who comes first.
I think thank you for sharing this. And I think you might have answered my question already, because I was wondering whether your research is already being used as part of people's treatment plan. And if it is, do they know that AI is being used?
Yes. So this is part of a cohort study where it went informed consent and ethical approval, and people were signing up to use for the data to be used for that aspect. Yeah. But I understand
But were decisions
question.
made?
Sorry?
Were decisions made based on this? Were the clinical decisions in those cohorts made based on their MRI scan?
No. Is that the question? No.
So the question is,
I didn't understand. Yeah.
if you have a patient, your research findings, is that being used as part of their treatment plan? And is the patient aware that AI is involved?
Yeah. So it was not part of the treatment plan. No. This was purely a research study where they volunteered and they also received reimbursement. They were informed that this was for the use of development of AI that could be used in the future, but it was not according to the treatment plan. But there is an ongoing trial where there is an AI recommender system that informs clinical practice that is currently taking part in quite a few European countries.
And people know that
Yes.
it is happening. The patients know that it is happening.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, there was someone up there. Oh, okay, go on. And then so now we are actually, whoever gets hold of the microphone. Then there is the gentleman there who was also.
So can I just ask a question on the potential of confounders? So obviously, if you find a sort of biomarker, it could either be the cause of the diagnosis, it could be the consequence of the diagnosis, or it could be the consequence of something that clusters with the diagnosis very closely. And we do know that behavior does really vary amongst people with different diagnoses and in ways that will probably affect their brain as well through drug use and things like that. So when you find a biomarker, how do you decide sort of where it sits in the kind of causal confounder pathway?
Yeah, thank you. That's a fantastic question. The clusters were the way that the machine learning model was developed. It incorporated information also about the age of the patient and the sex of the patient. So the clusters that were identified and the brain structures that were identified were independent of age and sex, because we wanted to make sure that the clustering was only about the disease rather than any other effect of age or sex. We then compared also the clusters and saw if there was any relationship to the medication that the people were taking. So that we ensured that there was no, the brain structures that we identified were not related to medication. In terms of where in the cause and effect the findings lie, brain MRI is a quite high level biological marker of underlying biological processes that might be happening on the cellular level. So I don't think this is an evidence of the cause of the disease, but it might point towards the areas of the brain where those causal cellular mechanisms are taking place. So it offers us a blueprint for where we should be looking into at the deeper level.
Okay, one more question only. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. I've been reminded. So do you want to, yeah, you have, oh, great, you've got a mic.
Sorry, hello. Yeah, hi. So I come from a background in AI and some working knowledge in psychology. And I wanted to ask a bit of a question regarding the user experience of, let's say, this kind of, I wouldn't say products as of now, but let's say systems that are going to come in the future time. Okay, so my first question is, instead of thinking of the AI models as the actual system that diagnoses a problem, instead of that, do you think it is more feasible or plausible to think of it as a screener system and more in terms, let's say, if you have some sort of an assistant, for example, just like we have ChatGPT right now, and the user goes on to talk with that system on a day-to-day basis. Now, instead of going for, let's say, very specific biomarkers that are very, let's say, already has a very high causal power or informativeness in it, can we go for like more subtle cues on a day-to-day basis, something like lack of attention or inability to attend to tasks that they have usually scheduled and all? So I think the question brings down to two major questions. First, instead of being a diagnosis system, can it be a screener system that stays with this user and in the long run looks for anomalies? And second is, can we go for more subtle cues instead of the more informative bio cues, let's say?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So for the first question, whether it can be targeted more to the user rather than like the patient rather than the clinicians, my worry would be that, if we go down that route and then people diagnose themselves with certain AI systems out there, there's going to be a big gap between that and receiving care. So I might be wrong in this, but I think it should always be within a healthcare system so that it's not an orphan thing that's happening outside there, and then the person might be diagnosed with something and can't get help for whatever reason. And I also have a bit of I'm a bit hesitant also. I think we were talking about AI, generative AI and ChatGPT as a therapist as well, which can be helpful for people who are on a waiting list to see a therapist, for example. But it might also have adverse effects because therapy is supposed to encourage independence. And if you constantly have something that you can access 24/7 to validate every question that you have, that might hinder progress rather than improve the progress. So I have some hesitation around that. And the second question that we had, so looking at more subtle signatures rather than these more biological ones. Yes, of course, we can look into that, and there's a lot of work that's happening there, and some of the people in my lab as well. It's just that my interest is very much on identifying this biological basis.
Okay, I think unfortunately, we will have to stop here, but I think we all agree that this has been a wonderful, wonderful presentation and discussion. So please thank Paris again.